Right, morning, everybody. Welcome. Creativity. We are talking today. What is it? How is it? Who is it? Where is it? I don't know how we do these things creatively. I think we try sometimes. Some of us are more creative than others. We have poets amongst us. We have critics amongst us who both can be creative, I suppose, one way or another. So, Lee, yeah, creativity. Are you creative? Am I creative? Who's creative around here?
Well, I think creativity is born in us. I think it might get, I have a great story about creativity from my school days when growing up in Zimbabwe and heading towards O-levels, and we had to choose. There was a point at which we had to decide whether we're going to do home economics. This is very gender stuff. So girls did home economics, boys did woodwork, and at some point in time you had to choose between, and both parties either had to choose home economics and art or woodwork and art. And so my art teacher, after I'd done art for 2 years at high school, wrote a note in my report saying, I suggest Lee does home economics. So that was my entry into how creative or artistic I was, but I have written a book. I've designed many training programs, and now I'm writing online training programs. And there is something very satisfying about a blank page in front of you, and step by step, moment by moment, filling the page. And you just see that, 2 hours, 5 hours, 3 weeks later, this page gets filled and filled and filled, and it wasn't there before. So there's something incredibly satisfying and fulfilling and exciting about that process. For me, what is the creative process? It's not, I don't feel like it's these grand ideas that land on my head in some magnificent way. To me, it's a discipline. So I don't feel like I'm inspired. I sit, I research, I think, I process, I write, I change. I constantly change what I'm writing. So it feels like it's a molding. I always think, especially when I was writing my book, and even now when I'm writing these online courses, I put something on the page as if I'm throwing something onto a wheel, a potter's wheel. And I've never done pottery, so I don't know what it feels like. But and then molding it and shaping it, and then it has to be reshaped. And so that's for me the process. And so, yeah, so I think I'll start with that. I do have a note from Herman. So I'm playing proxy for Herman. So Ivan, when you think about adding somebody to the list of things, I would like to add something that Herman is sharing.
All right, great. Thanks, Lee. Yeah, it's interesting you tell that story about our school days. I was, for some reason, supposedly one of the brighter kids in my class, and we weren't allowed to do anything practical. You had to do academic subjects. I wanted to do homework. I wanted to do technical drawing. I wanted to do woodworking, and I wasn't allowed to because the A stream students weren't allowed to do that. That was the C and D stream students that did those practical things. And I hated theory, still do. Yeah, because I managed to wangle my way through my exams without too much effort, they said, no, you can't do those practical skills, be creative. So yeah, I found that very frustrating at school, and I think it's one of the big challenges with the education environment as it was structured then, and I think in some cases still structured now. It doesn't lean towards the natural abilities of the student. It tries to put them into boxes and say, well, because you this profile, you must do this, and because you that profile, you can't do this and you must do that. And all of us learn differently. All of us acquire information and knowledge differently. And I really think that that education should do those sorts of things. So I became creative in a different way once I started writing programs. Used to say I'm not creative at all, but when you think about writing complex integrated business systems, I think one has to get reasonably creative. So that's where I'm coming from. So let's go across to the creative accountant amongst us. So Ed, creative accounting.
Yeah, it's interesting, Ivan. I had exactly the same school upbringing. Because I was good at science, I wasn't allowed to do woodwork or metalwork or any of the practical things, which would have been useful because I can't even put a shelf up now. And I thought it's interesting when we're talking about schools, because I think I've mentioned it before. NASA have a creativity test, and 98% of 5-year-olds can pass it. By the time you get to 15, only 12% of children can pass it. And when you get to adult ages, it's 3%. And I think our system, and certainly for me, I think our system just squashes that creativity out. And as an accountant, I followed a process, I followed lines, I followed numbers, I followed spreadsheets, and there is nothing creative about accountancy. It all has to fit in the right box. It has to follow the rules. But later on, I think I've become creative. And part of it's unlearning that process you go through. And one of the simplest things, I always write in lists. I've always written lists. When I discovered mind maps, I take it, have you guys come across mind maps? Yeah. It changed the way I was. And actually do mind maps with colors, and you're really on steroids. And then I noticed when I go on my writing retreats, we have prompts. We have prompts to kind of get us started. And very often they're pictures and also words. So there's two things. And I think for me, we are no good at creation whatsoever. We cannot create life and we cannot create matter. So our creation is quite limited. So we're being creative, we're not creating things. And according to my dictionary, creative is inventive and imaginative. And imagination is using the mental facility to form images or concepts not present in the senses. And then inventive is skills in devising or contriving things. And for me, it's all about making connections, connecting things that don't seem to have any connection in the first place, which is why the mind maps work. And the stories in my small book are all about connecting things that aren't apparent. And what I used to do was take two things in a day and try and connect them. And I heard about a blind baby rhinoceros that was kept in a little enclave. And then a bit later on, I was reading about ants. So I combined the two and had an ant that shouted. And eventually he couldn't move anymore. He loved to explore, but he got swept off a table in Madekwe Game Reserve, actually. And he then decided to sit on the head of this rhinoceros and shout instructions. So the rhinoceros could go wandering around the plains and the ant could go and see stuff. So I think it's connecting things that aren't connected. But to do that, you need, like Lee said, to do your research. You need to be interested in stuff. You need to know stuff. I couldn't have come up with that poem we read yesterday if I didn't know that Rock of Ages was about a cleft in the rock. And that's where the trolls came from. So I think it's, for me, it's connecting things. It's also about constraints. If you're constrained, you tend to have to come up with solutions. There's a wonderful piece of a guy with Alzheimer's wrote a little tune using 4 notes, and it was played on Radio 4, and they picked it up, and then they put a whole orchestral score to it, but out of 4 notes, and it was amazing. So I think, and I've been trying to come up with my creative process, and so far I've come up with 4 C's. That's connections, constraints, condensation, because very often it's a big cloud of mist and thoughts, and you need to condense it down into something that people can understand. And then concentration, because it doesn't happen by chance. When you write a book, the first draft is terrible, and then it has to be worked on. And I'm sure, you know, the great artists don't just suddenly come out of bed and do that melting clock thing that whoever did it was, with a Picasso or something, can't remember. So I think it's about concentration. I've got to work some more on it because I want to get 7 C's, because it's just a bit of a pun, and I like puns.
Well, then you can go sailing, Ed. You can go sailing on the 7 Seas. So.
Yeah, so I think it is, you know, it's a whole mixture of stuff. But I think if you look at all the creatives, they're interested, they're intelligent, they're observant. It's not something that just pops out. You've got to work at it.
Great, thanks, Ed. I'll give you another C, confusion, because I never managed to get mind maps to work for me. It just didn't make sense to me at all. There you go. Right, so Jasper, let's see what's creative in your world.
Morning. Thank you for putting me after Ed, because Ed has summarized it for us. And Ed, I like your, what was it, 4 C's that you came up with, and we'll still look for the others. But I think I want to maybe start there by saying when Lee introduced the topic, creativity, and then in between the chats, Steve mentioned some other stuff. I think creativity for me equals work, but not work like a job which is mundane and monotonous, but it's almost that divine thing in you that is your, it's meant for you. You were made for that thing. So whether that work is to then create with your hands, and out of your hands your mind sees shapes, and you then are able to shape it, whether from metal or wood or glass or wires. I mean, I'm amazed to see some of the stuff that some of our less fortunate people who live in the rural townships managed to just shape out of you know, scrap metals and wire and stuff like that. And you can actually, you're amazed at how they have almost insight without probably attending a school and writing exams, but they have insight for the relationships of mechanics and you know, how things work and stuff like that. So, but I think creation, like Ed said there in his whole thing, it's concentration and the persistence. So where does it start? And I think I'm probably like Lee, being more able to put things in words and take things that doesn't exist and then try and shape it into structures and organizations and find a way to communicate how it makes sense. But that takes hard work. If I just look at the process we went through with GIG, it was a 12-year process to now get to the starting point where people can see it a bit more clearer. And yet I'm frustrated that I'm not able to actually break through on that, what I feel is the next stage or a last stage, but it's that whole legacy coach concept and how it all relates and finding the missing link. So I think that's probably the call it the part of creation is this constant discomfort with the work in front of you, that it's not yet finished. And yet every painter and every person who's created a book or whatever had to come to a point to say, okay, it's not perfect, but this is as far as I can bring it for now. And it's amazing then when you see people add the further additions, how the things start to shape and becoming more clearer and clearer. So I think, yeah, so creation for me is work, but the positive part of work. It necessitates engaging with others. And I think a lot of the, you know, the great minds of the past, the Leonardo da Vinci's and those kind of people, they never confined themselves to only a certain space of learning and understanding. They constantly explore new disciplines and almost become the forerunners in those spaces. And today if I just look at now, we're engaging on a digital platform, and you know, old heads like me and Trevor had to master how to do things like what yesterday, Twitter. I still can't do Twitter, but you know, it's basic social media. And it comes from, as you engage with others, you start seeing maybe the value and the application of, okay, if I can master that or learn more about that, I think it can add an interesting addition to my set of skills. And I think it then also become ongoing experimentation, because you are never finished, but you play around with putting these two components together. And if it doesn't work, then you change the component with another component. And it can be frustrating that after years and years of tinkering, you can have nothing to show for it. But in the process, you've learned what does not work. So I think to maybe then summarize, creativity is an ongoing process where you have to exercise your creative muscles. You have to exercise your imagination. You have to exercise your way of communication and communicating with others so that you can extract information from them. So I think I'm just expanding on what Ed has already said. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Jasper. And speaking of exercise, we're going to have to get across to Cecile next.
Hi, guys. Yeah, interesting when you guys were talking about school. At our school, that was also, they were renowned for the good academics. You had to, the subjects that you had to choose was either Latin. Oh man, there's someone's phoning in between, but can you still hear me? Can you still hear me?
Yeah, we got you. We got you.
Well, okay. Sorry, there's just a call that I'm going to ignore. So we had to select subjects like Latin or German, and on the other side against accounting. And it was almost a given that people that were academically strong were not supposed to do accounting. It was for people that couldn't study well. I couldn't memorize and regurgitate stuff. And we didn't have, in our school, we didn't have stuff like technical drawing, and we only had academic subjects. They called it academic subjects. So my brother always wanted to be a pilot from the time that he was small. So my mom in standard 6, in grade 8, had to move him to another school, the technical school in Bloemfontein, because the technical school was the only school in Bloemfontein that you could do technical subjects like technical drawing and accounting and stuff like that. Well, he did go on to become a pilot, and then he had his own, he has his own pilot company and chopper company. So that was just such a perception in our day. I think it's changed quite a lot nowadays, because afterwards you can kick yourself that you didn't have. Oh, and business economics was for the domkinders. You can kick yourself that you didn't do those subjects at school. You would have done much better than history and geography and those kind of subjects. And then I always think of myself as not very creative, but disciplined to do things that one has to do. But while I'm not sure, maybe Jasper was talking, I realized, well, at school I used to be very good with words. I used to write good essays and stuff like that. But I think what I'm good at now, and that maybe that's also a creative process, it's almost like the reverse of a creative process. I can put difficult concepts into simple language. in our industry, Ivan would know that in our industry, people love to talk in acronyms, and the normal person on the street look at you when you talk to them about their their ID and their ABX and their voice stuff. They look at you with big eyes if you come up with all these acronyms. So I like to, when I see a new customer, to draw pictures and to show them this is how your stuff is going to work. And I try to put it in simple language. Maybe that's also kind of a part of a creative process. I don't know. So yeah, so it's interesting to hear all of your creativities.
Thanks, Cecile. Yeah, absolutely. We love our TLAs in our industry, don't we? Yeah. You all know what a TLA is, don't you? 3-letter acronym. So on that note, we better hear from Herman.
Yes, thank you. Thank you to Herman. He says that he's not able to participate, but in typical Herman language, which I absolutely love, he says, here with some ideas on creativity. Sir Ken Robinson's, a former lecturer at one of the British universities, says the following: creativity is the process of having original ideas that have value, which often comes through interactions of different disciplinary ways of seeing things. So I think that, connects with what Edward was saying about connections, this through interactions of different disciplinary ways of seeing things. And also this, that it's original, there's something original about it. He goes on to say, someone else made another important point. Creativity is not a talent. It is a way of operating. And then he says, creativity is the essence of building a new future. If we conclude that the way things are not sufficient to solve our current global problems, it means we must think outside the box. It means we must join together in an effort to develop new levels of creative thinking, creative feeling, and creative action. And I think that join together, that connects with what Jasper was saying about that it's with others. And certainly I've also experienced that creativity is sparked when you're with others, that there's definitely my idea, and I've seen it in groups where I present my idea and somebody else picks it up and adds and shapes, and then somebody else says, oh, what about this and what about that? And suddenly the sum of the combination of everybody's brains firing in different directions, but connecting different dots are now creating and molding something that everybody now feels that they've participated in, that they've shared in, and that was different to what one person came up with. So that's me adding to Herman's input. So thanks, Herman.
Right, thanks, Lee. Right, Steve, let's hear your thoughts on creativity.
Thanks, Simon. I'm listening to Cecile reminded me of my 5-year high school career in which I took 5 years worth of Latin. And I was so grateful to my father was a classic scholar, and he taught Latin at Greek during his career as a teacher. And I was so grateful for that because it was such a purposeless subject to take at that point. There was a tiny little class. I think Latin finally got phased out of our school probably 6 or 7 years after I'd matriculated. As the numbers dwindled down, I think they had 3 people in the last class. In my matric class, there were 11 of us out of 128 taking Latin. And I'm so grateful for the opportunity to have taken this purposeless subject, because I love languages and I loved languages back then. And it's been such a great gift to me as I've studied ancient languages now and have had to use them in a lot of what I do. But I think the greatest gift was the idea of just going through the process, and that there was no great goal in mind. I wasn't going to go and become a lawyer or a doctor, and I didn't need Latin for it to be hugely purposeful. But the process of just being opened to ancient literature and poetry and thinking, the ethics, I think, of Plato and Aristotle, etc., the philosophers, is such a wonderful process of just open-ended exploration. with a wonderful teacher who was very good at encouraging that. And so I'm very grateful for that in a time in life where everything was supposed to be purposeful and you were supposed to cut down your academic choices as you got closer to matric for only the things that would serve you, you know, to make a success of your life or success in business or make money or whatever it might be. That I was given that opportunity to just do something pretty much purposeless, as at least that's what it was seen at the time. And it's been so wonderful. And, you know, I think a lot about education. I liked Ivan's comments. I think about education, that it's a great way of killing and squashing creativity out of children. I think it was Ed who was referencing that 5-year-olds in terms of their creativity. And as you go up, I'm amazed at the difference between 5-year-olds and 15-year-olds when I've worked across the age range. And a 15-year-old will be able to tell you that this is a spoon, but they won't really be able to tell you anything else, because they're so cemented in the idea that this is a single purpose thing because they've been taught this is what it is. Whereas if you give this to a 5-year-old and you say, go and explore, what could this become? You'll be amazed at what they'll give back to you. And I think that's a lot of what's missing in some of the entrepreneurial spirit in the world. But entrepreneurs who get it right are the ones who can take a spoon and give you back a business, or give you back a brand new product or a different idea, or will solve one of the world's greatest problems. You know, when you don't tell them what it is, but you ask them what it is. And so I think creativity and curiosity and discovery go hand in hand. I like Kobus Neteling, who's somebody that I've studied under, who's a creativity expert. He's a South African psychologist and doctor who wrote this book, Creativity Uncovered, and a number of other things. He says creativity is simply seeing things with new eyes. And I like that definition, that there is no one of us who is not able to be creative, or who's not born with the gift of creativity. It just expresses itself differently. And I think there again, our upbringing has often taught us that, you know, creativity is only in the arts, and only if you paint something or draw something or sing something, maybe, then you're creative, which I think is just utter trash. So you asked a question about tools. That's why I brought the spoon out. I think one of the greatest lessons I've learned in terms of creativity, in terms of things that you can actively do to stimulate it, is to take something like this and give yourself a task and say, right, in 30 minutes, I need to come up with 10 different uses for this item. And I know what it is and I know what it's used for, but let me go and think laterally and just come across ideas of what it might be. One of the things I love doing with younger children, if I work with them, is you take children's stories like, Little Red Riding Hood, and you get them to tell the story from the wolf's perspective, or you get them to tell you the story as if it turned out differently, or from the grandmother's perspective. And I think that ability to take something that we understand in sort of a static sense and then look at it dynamically and go, well, what could this be if it was different? I think is a wonderful way for all of us, but I specifically see it when I work with young people, to cultivate creativity, because I think we desperately need it. Anyway, some rambling thoughts on creativity.
Great, thanks, Steve. I always wondered why the kids' stories were always so violent and bloody and dark. You know, it's what are we trying to teach our kids when we're telling them all these horror stories when they're small?
We're teaching them about life. We're teaching them truth. It is bloody and gory.
Who's truth? Yeah, I'm not too sure. Right, Trevor, let's get across to you.
Oh dear, I'm going to expose myself here again, I think. So
I heard you do it creatively. That's fine.
I think I heard things like work, order, discipline, lines, box, and all that sort of thing. And the Hardy-Dars agree with me. Cecile, if you'll take them back again, please. And to me, there can be no discipline to creativity. I think, and I've written that for me, I believe all ideas that actually come into the mind somewhere along the line are divinely inspired. Whatever people want to think about it comes from the universe, wherever they have these sort of thinkings. But as you were all talking right from the beginning, I was thinking back to my early school days. Look, I was a little bit difficult to control at school, so I'll have to admit that. But I do remember one little instance of someone trying to teach us art and all the discipline of art and all this sort of thing. And we had to present our projects at the end of this 40-minute session, I think it was. I must have been in about standard 6. And I took the quill pen. Do you remember those old quill pens that that had a long thing with a nib you had to borrow from the teacher, and you stick it into the inkwell? And I had this blank piece of paper, and I just shot a blot on the paper, folded it, opened it, and man, it looked, when it opened, it came out like a picture of Christ. And I was able to explain what I actually saw in this blot, while everyone else had been drawing all these things, and I got a prize for that artwork. So for me, inspiration, I can't work to order. This discipline of having to go in directions and put down 1, 2, 3 points and have a creative process. Since when is creative a process, man? It's inspirational. So I only really react to inspiration. And if I think back to that Confessions of a Serial Entrepreneur, I wrote that book in less than a week. And that was during the times that I wasn't swimming and running and that sort of thing. I would go off, run, had a thought, oh, let me just write this down. And every single word of that was written from beginning to end without any structure of any kind. And it's almost, I'm sure, it's 99.9% as I actually wrote it down. And I'm not a scribe, I'm not an author, I'm not any of those things. What else came up? I spent a lot of time on the border as a youngster as well. And I remember being quite surprised. We used to, in some of the time, you while away your time with tambuti wood and carving things. And I had a number of girlfriends that actually went away with beautiful wooden jewelry in tambuti wood. I couldn't believe the blooming stuff. Some of them actually showed it to me about 5 or 10 years later. And then you would have paid a fortune for it in a jewelry store. What else did I write there? So that just, I don't have the discipline to go to a creative process. I have to respond puts that have come through my mind, and then it's got to go down, and that gives me, I'm amazed with the things that actually come up with. So interpret that, Ed, Steve, Jasper, Lee, Herman, and Cecile from a German point of view. By the way, Domine dirige nos, I'm checking your Latin, Steve.
We hope for the good of our sailors.
No, that was natai, natarum, natos. Oh Lord, guide us. Domine dirige nos, Jasper will like it.
And on that note, I'm now completely confused.
No, that's why I like you had a lovely statement up there, which I actually, where was it? You put it there, Ivan, about the creative conundrum. I think you absolutely talked common sense there. Please repeat it. I can't find it on my chat facility.
Clearly the creative conundrum confuses the clown in the circus completely.
Now, you see, I absolutely understand that. I'm going to go and paint a picture to reflect that comment here.
There you go. See, I just take the big picture and I break it down into little things. Is that creative? I don't know. Anyway, so Lee, there we go. My 7C process, absolutely. So tomorrow, are we going? We're moving on to D, are we? So yeah, you know, we've had our A's and our B's and our C's. Now we're getting into the D students around it. So.
Well, I'm jumping straight to I, and I don't mean me. I'd like to explore this idea of inspiration. You know, one of the questions I ask, so I'm doing a series of workshops with the staff at the University of Mpumalanga around their values, and they have 7 values, and we're talking about the behaviors that will inculcate these values as part of their culture and their way of working and being at the university. And their last value is inspiration, to be more and do more than we at first imagined, to be more and do more than we first imagined. And when I'm doing the workshop, the last question I ask around inspiration, and it's to end off the workshop, is what is inspiring you at the moment? And so that's the question I'd like to pose for tomorrow. What is inspiring you at the moment?
Thanks, Lee. So go and be inspired. Have an inspiring day. Don't perspire too much while you're being inspired, but stick to the 7 Ps and you'll get it all right, Trevor. You've got to do some proper prior planning. So go and have a great day, folks, and we'll see you tomorrow. Go well. Cheers.